In a universe where everything can be destroyed in the blink of an eye, an alien warrior stands face to face with death. Carell, a warrior of the Verani Empire, is captured, bound, and ready to face her end at the hands of the enemy she's been taught to hate. But just as she braces for death, something unexpected happens. A human soldier, instead of raising his weapon, pulls out a bottle of water and acts so simple yet so unexpected. No words, no hatred, just an act of mercy she never imagined. What happens when longtime enemies, once willing to slaughter each other, suddenly share an unforgettable moment? And in that moment, can trust be built from the ruins of war? This question leads you into an unpredictable journey where life and death no longer have clear boundaries, where each decision can change an entire universe. Join us as we explore this story, where Carell and Jace fight not only for survival but to break down prejudice, touching the hearts of a universe consumed by war and hatred. The battlefield is a graveyard of shattered metal and scorched earth. Smoke rises from the wreckage, twisting into the sky like a dying breath. The air is thick with the scent of burnt flesh, a stench that clings to the very ground, mingling with the metallic tang of spent ammunition. In the silence, the distant crackle of flames is the only sound, a haunting lullaby to the dead. Amidst the chaos, Carell kneels in the dust, her arms bound behind her with thick, coarse rope. Her posture is slumped, as if the weight of the world presses down on her shoulders. She trembles, but it isn't from the cold. It's the anticipation, the fear. The fear that this is the end. Her breathing is shallow, ragged, as she watches the movement around her with wary eyes. She knows what happens next. Death is inevitable for the defeated. The Verani soldier has fought hard, but now, she's nothing more than a prisoner. A broken pawn in a game she never wanted to play. Her head hangs low, her eyes cast downward, unable to meet the eyes of the human who holds her fate in his hands. Jace approaches silent, like a shadow in the dimming light. His steps are deliberate, the crunch of his boots against the charred ground muffled by the weight of the moment. His face is a mask, unreadable, as though he has already seen too much. His gaze, cold but steady, flickers over her for only a moment before he kneels beside her. Instead of raising his weapon, instead of delivering the death she expects, Jace reaches into his pack. Carell looks up briefly, startled, her body instinctively flinching at his movement. Her eyes narrow, scanning his every gesture with suspicion. But instead of the glint of a blade, he pulls out a small, battered canteen, offering it to her. The water inside shimmers in the dimming light, and Carell stares at it, confused. This is no ordinary soldier. She had been prepared for her execution, had even accepted it. But this is different. Carell, her voice barely above a whisper, edged with disbelief. Why? He doesn't answer immediately. Instead, Jace holds the canteen out to her, waiting, his expression unreadable. Finally, after a long moment, he speaks, his voice soft, almost reluctant to break the heavy silence. Jace, simply, his eyes meeting hers, steady and calm. "Because you look thirsty?" The words land in the air like a quiet shockwave, and for a moment, Carell doesn't know how to react. The simplest answer, the one she never expected, strikes her to the core. Thirst. Not for vengeance, not for her life, but simply for water. The very human need that transcends everything else. For the first time since the battle began, she's not treated as an enemy, as a soldier to be destroyed, but as someone real. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Carell takes the canteen. The water is cool against her cracked lips. She drinks, her hands trembling as the water soothes her parched throat, its clarity a stark contrast to the ash-laden air around them. For a brief moment, the violence, the destruction, everything falls away. It's just her, just this fleeting moment of humanity. After a long pause, Jace rises and begins to build a small fire. The crackling of dry wood is the only sound that fills the hollow air. He moves with practiced ease, his motions smooth and efficient, as if this is the only thing he knows to do in a world gone wrong. He sets a few simple rations out before her, offering what little food he has. She watches him, the shock still painted across her face. He doesn't look at her directly as he unties her hands, his fingers working methodically, almost absent-mindedly. As the ropes fall away, Carell flexes her wrists, feeling the blood rush back into her limbs. "Carell," her voice hoarse, but tinged with genuine confusion, "you should have killed me. You were supposed to. Why didn't you?" Her words hang in the air, unanswered for a moment. Jace turns to her finally, his expression softening slightly, but still distant. He looks at her, not as a prisoner, but as someone who has made the same choice, walked the same dark road. The weight of what he says is evident in the quiet space between them. "Jace," his tone simple, his words heavy with unspoken history, "you had the chance to, but didn't." For a heartbeat, the canyon around them seems to fade, as though the world holds its breath. Carell can feel the truth of his words, like a quiet echo in her chest. They are both survivors, both scarred by choices they never wanted to make. But in this moment, there is an unspoken bond forming between enemies, between strangers. A shared understanding, however brief. As the fire crackles softly between them, the stars overhead begin to pierce the dark sky like scattered diamonds, and the silence settles around them once again, this time with a different weight. Not of finality, not of death, but of something new, something uncertain, but still alive. The battlefield is eerily quiet after the chaos of combat. The ground is littered with the remains of broken machines, twisted metal, and the scattered debris of war. The air is thick with the scent of smoke, acrid and pungent, as the remains of destroyed vehicles still smolder. The jagged remnants of buildings rise like skeletal remains, their once proud facades now crumbling. The only sounds are the distant crackling of fires and the occasional gust of wind that stirs the dust, making the ruins feel even more lifeless. Carell and Jace walk through the aftermath of the battle, their footsteps muffled by the charred earth. The air is heavy, thick with the weight of everything that's been lost. Carell's gaze is focused on the ground, her eyes scanning the wreckage as if looking for something, anything to distract her from the quiet agony of survival. She's still shaken from the fight, from the confusion of her capture and the strange turn of events that followed. She doesn't trust Jace. Not yet. Jace, however, walks with purpose, his movements calm, almost methodical. He's been through this before. The stillness of the battlefield doesn't seem to faze him. He's accustomed to the wreckage, the aftermath of destruction. Every step he takes is deliberate, but there's a weariness in his eyes, a weight that speaks of countless battles fought, countless losses endured. They passed through the wreckage without a word. It's the kind of silence that feels almost unnatural, like the world has been held in a moment of suspended animation. The noise of battle has faded, but the echoes of it linger in the air like a distant, haunting memory. Carell, her voice low, almost reluctant as she glances at Jace. Where are we going? Jace, without breaking stride, his voice quiet but steady. A safe place. A place where we can figure out what's next. There's a pause, the weight of her question still hanging in the air. Carell knows that there is no next. There is only survival, and even that feels fragile. The tension between them is palpable, a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. Carell doesn't trust him, and she knows he doesn't trust her. They are both survivors, but they are also strangers, two pieces of a puzzle that don't quite fit together. The path they follow winds deeper into the desolation. Jace leads her toward a narrow, hidden passage between two fallen buildings. It's tight, the walls lined with debris, and the air is heavier here, stale and filled with dust. As they move through it, Carell catches glimpses of the sky above, the stars barely visible through the smoke. She can't shake the feeling that they are being watched, that the danger isn't over. Jace, glancing over his shoulder, his voice calm but urgent, keep moving. We're not out of the woods yet. Carell doesn't answer. She simply nods, her hand instinctively resting on the hilt of her weapon. She's still on edge, still waiting for the next attack, the next fight. But the deeper they go into the ruins, the more she begins to feel a shift, a subtle change in the air, as if something is stirring beneath the surface. Suddenly, Jace stops, holding up a hand in a silent command. His eyes narrow as he scans the area ahead. Carell stops too, her senses sharpening. Jace, in a low voice, barely a whisper there. Ahead of them, partially hidden beneath the rubble, is a small figure, an alien child. Its body is small and fragile, curled up in the remains of a destroyed structure. The child's skin is pale, its limbs contorted in a way that speaks of the trauma it's endured. The faint, labored sound of its breathing is the only noise breaking the oppressive silence. Carell's instincts scream at her to keep moving, to ignore it. After all, they have no time to waste. But Jace doesn't move. Instead, he crouches low, his eyes fixed on the child. Carell watches, a mix of confusion and disbelief crossing her face. This isn't a time for sympathy. Not when they are both still on the run. Carell, softly, with a hint of hesitation, "What are you doing?" Jace doesn't answer immediately. He simply moves toward the child, his movements slow and careful, as if afraid to startle it. When he reaches the child, he gently pulls it from the rubble, cradling its fragile body in his arms. The child is barely conscious, its eyes fluttering as it struggles to breathe. Carell watches in silence, her heart pounding in her chest. She doesn't know what to make of this. She expected him to walk past, to leave the child behind. After all, they are fighting for their own survival. But Jace is doing something she didn't expect. He's saving it. Carell, her voice quiet, filled with disbelief. "Why?" Jace doesn't answer right away. Instead, he shifts the child carefully in his arms, his face showing signs of wear but no hesitation. He gently places the child down, checking its injuries before turning to Carell. "Jace," his voice calm, but carrying an underlying weight, "because I remember what it feels like to be forgotten." Carell's breath catches in her throat as his words sink in. She watches him, her mind racing, trying to understand this man who had once been her enemy. She's still not sure she trusts him, but in this moment, she sees something she hadn't expected: compassion. Humanity, even in the midst of all this destruction. For a brief second, Carell feels her walls start to crack, just a little. But she pushes the feeling down. There's no room for softness, not now. The world they live in doesn't allow it. Carell, softly, almost to herself, "We can't afford to care." Jace, his eyes meeting hers, unwavering, "Maybe that's exactly why we have to." They stand there for a moment, looking at each other, the weight of their choices heavy in the silence. Then, as if on cue, they both turn and continue down the narrow path, the distant sound of the child's breathing the only thing left to remind them of the fragile thread of humanity that binds them together. The remnants of a small bunker carved into the ashen landscape. The air is thick with dust, and the walls are scorched from years of conflict. Sparse light filters through cracks in the concrete, illuminating the debris-strewn interior. A dull hum of silence hangs heavy, interrupted only by the occasional sigh of wind outside. The stillness contrasts sharply with the violence of the outside world. Inside the bunker, the flickering light of a small fire casts shadows that dance across the room, illuminating two figures who are finally catching their breath. Jace lies against the cold, hard wall, his body bruised and battered from the skirmish with the hunter drones. His breathing is slow, but steady, though the pain is clear in the tense set of his jaw. The flickering firelight dances across his face, casting strange shadows that make him appear even more worn than he is. Carell sits across from him, cleaning her wounds with methodical precision, though her hands shake slightly with exhaustion. She's been through this before, patching herself up, surviving another day, but there's something different now. Her mind isn't just focused on survival anymore. It lingers on the encounter with Jace, the water he gave her, the kindness he showed when death was the expectation. She glances at him, Jace, the silent warrior who has saved her life more than once now. She knows nothing about him, yet something in the way he moves, the way he fights, speaks of a deeper story. It's a story she might never hear, but she feels a nagging curiosity pulling at her. After a long silence, Carell speaks, her voice quiet but steady, her eyes still on her hands as she applies the cloth to a cut on her arm. Carell, her voice low, hesitant. I've never told anyone what I did, why I'm here. Jace doesn't look up immediately, his focus still on the crackling fire, but something in her tone causes him to pause. His hand, which had been slowly peeling off the worn straps of his armor, stills. He doesn't speak, but his silence invites her to continue. Carell, looking down, almost as if speaking to herself, I was part of the Verani Royal Guard. The elite. I followed orders, like any soldier. But there was one order I couldn't follow. She's quiet for a moment, her mind tracing the memories back to that fateful day. The images rise like ghosts from the depths of her past, flashes of flames, the screams, the desperate cries of civilians caught in the crossfire. Her chest tightens, but she pushes forward. Carell, her voice trembling, but resolute, they told me to burn a human village. To slaughter everyone in it. Women. Children. All of them. And I refused. There's a long pause, the words hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Jace's eyes shift, and for the first time, his gaze softens. He can see the weight of her words, the burden of the choice that still holds her in its grip. He doesn't speak immediately, letting her process it in her own time. Carell, her voice softening, almost bitter, I was branded a traitor for it. They called me weak, called me worthless. And I was cast out. They threw me away, like I was nothing. And now, I'm here. The silence in the bunker is thick, heavy with the weight of what she's shared. Her breath comes in shallow, ragged bursts as she stares at her hands, trying to make sense of the past, of the path that led her to this moment. The fire crackles between them, the only sound in the stillness. Jace, finally speaking, his voice gravelly but calm, I know what that feels like. Carell's head snaps up, her eyes wide with surprise. She wasn't expecting him to respond. She's spent her life thinking she was the only one who had ever felt the sting of betrayal, of refusing an order that went against everything she believed in. But now, Jace is looking at her with something more than just the eyes of a soldier. He looks like someone who has walked the same road, who has made the same choices. Carell, her voice sharp, almost disbelieving, what do you mean? Jace, his gaze distant, as though the memory is painful but necessary. I was in Black Ops. They gave me orders, 2 things I couldn't do. Orders to wipe out civilians. A whole town of refugees. I was supposed to plant explosives in their homes, make sure they were all gone. But I couldn't do it. There's a beat of silence, a heavy pause as Jace's words sink in. Carell stares at him, her mind racing. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to speak so openly, to share something so deeply personal. She's not sure what to say. She doesn't know if she's even allowed to speak. Jace, looking her in the eyes now, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. I walked away. They called me a coward, just like they did with you. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't be that. And now, here we are. There's a long, heavy silence between them. Carell stares at him, the truth of his words settling in her chest. She's not alone in this anymore. She's not the only one who has made a choice to refuse. In that moment, the distance between them feels smaller, as if the walls they've built up around themselves have cracked just a little. Carell looks away, blinking rapidly as a mix of emotions floods her mind. She's still unsure of Jace, still uncertain of where he stands, but in the quiet of the bunker, something shifts. The bonds of war are complicated, but there's an undeniable understanding between them. They've both walked away from something. They've both chosen a path of their own, even if it's led them into the unknown. Jace, finally breaking the silence, his voice quieter, but full of meaning. We're not so different, you and I. Carell doesn't respond right away. She doesn't know what to say. Instead, she shifts slightly, her posture loosening just a little. She leans back against the cold wall, the tension in her body slowly starting to fade. It's not much. It's not trust yet, but it's something. The fire crackles between them, the flames flickering in the dark. The silence isn't as heavy as it was before. It's just two people, survivors, both struggling with the weight of their choices but finding, for a moment, a quiet solace in the company of someone who understands. The night is cold and unyielding, the sky above painted in shades of deep violet and black. The ruins of the battlefield stretch endlessly around them, twisted metal and jagged stone forming an unforgiving landscape. The distant flicker of firelight from the wreckage casts long, trembling shadows across the shattered earth. Despite the destruction, the quiet of the night is unsettling, a stillness that is only interrupted by the occasional rustle of debris in the wind. Carell and Jace move cautiously through the wreckage, their bodies tense, their senses sharpened. The air is heavy, thick with the weight of survival. Carell's gaze flicks from shadow to shadow, her grip tightening on her weapon as she scans the dark landscape around them. She doesn't trust the silence, doesn't trust the stillness. She knows it's only a matter of time before something breaks it. Jace, we've got a few miles to go. Stay sharp. Carell, I don't like this quiet. It's too empty. Jace doesn't respond. He just nods, his focus never wavering. He's been in these situations before, and he knows that the quiet before a storm is always the deadliest part. They move through the rubble with a sense of purpose, the weight of their survival pressing down on them, each step bringing them closer to the relative safety of the mountains in the distance. Suddenly, the sound of something moving catches Carell's attention. It's a low growl, mechanical and disturbing, reverberating through the air like a dark omen. She stops dead in her tracks, her body going rigid, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. "Carell, Jace, do you hear that?" "Jace, I hear it." A moment of stillness follows, the growl growing louder, the sound of heavy, mechanical footsteps crunching through the debris. Then, from the shadows, they emerge bone dogs. These aren't animals. They aren't living creatures at all. They are mechanical predators, sleek, terrifying, and fast, their bodies covered in jagged, bone-like armor. Their glowing red eyes scan the darkness, reflecting the flickering light of the distant fires. Their low growls are more like the hum of machinery, ominous and mechanical, echoing through the air like a warning. "Jace, get ready. They are coming." The bone dogs advance quickly, their movements precise and coordinated, like hunters tracking their prey. Carell and Jace barely have time to react before the first one lunges toward them, its metal jaws snapping shut with a sickening screech. Without hesitation, Jace raises his weapon, firing a shot that hits the bone dog square in the chest. Sparks fly, but the creature doesn't falter. It growls again, its glowing red eyes narrowing, and it comes at him with a speed that's almost impossible to track. "Carell, move." She charges forward, meeting the bone dog head-on. Her weapon strikes with precision, slicing into the creature's leg, causing it to stumble. But it's not enough. The bone dog recovers quickly, lunging at her with terrifying speed. She rolls to the side just in time, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. "Jace, watch out." A second bone dog emerges from the shadows, its claws slashing through the air, aiming for Carell's throat. Jace leaps forward, knocking her out of the way just as the creature's claw swipes past them. He takes the brunt of the attack, the metal claws scraping across his side, drawing blood. He grits his teeth but doesn't falter. "Carell, Jace." But he's already moving, his instincts kicking in. He thrusts his weapon forward, narrowly missing the bone dog's throat. The creature snarls, its metal jaws snapping at him, but Jace pulls back just in time. "Jace, keep moving. We need to get to the high ground." The bone dogs close in from all sides. Sparks fly as weapons collide with their armored bodies, the air thick with the scent of burning metal and the sharp tang of plasma fire. Carell moves with deadly efficiency, her blade flashing as she cuts through the bone dogs one by one, but there are too many of them. Their movements are too fast, too precise. They are engineered to kill. Carell and Jace fight back to back, their weapons flashing in the night as they hold their ground. Every strike is a desperate plea for survival. The bone dogs attack with precision, each one faster and more dangerous than the last. They are relentless, circling, adapting to every move the two warriors make. "Jace, Carell. We can't keep this up." Carell watches as one of the bone dogs charges directly at them, its jaws open wide, ready to strike. In one fluid motion, she slashes at its throat, sending it crashing to the ground in a spray of sparks. But as the creature falls, another emerges, faster and more aggressive than before. Carell, we have to get to that pass. We're almost there. With a final surge of energy, they break through the remaining bone dogs, barely escaping the deadly circle they've been trapped in. Their breath comes in ragged bursts as they sprint toward the high ground, the canyon walls looming above them like silent giants. A small, dimly lit recovery room deep inside a hidden rebel camp. The air smells faintly of antiseptic and old wood, the walls cracked and patched with scraps of metal. A single lantern hangs in the corner, its weak light flickering against the damp stone. Outside, the world is still a calm after the storm. But inside this room, two figures sit in the shadows, their silence thick with unspoken words. Jace stirs as he regains consciousness, his eyes fluttering open to the dim, flickering light of the room. His body aches, a dull, constant pain seeping into his bones. His side is bandaged, but he can still feel the sting of the injuries. His vision is blurry at first, but it sharpens as he looks around. There's a quiet warmth in the room, a strange sense of safety that he hasn't felt in a long time. Carell is sitting nearby, her face illuminated by the soft light, her posture relaxed but alert. She doesn't seem to be sleeping. She's watching him closely, though she doesn't make a move to speak immediately. Jace, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper as he stirs in the cot. Where are we? Carell, glancing at him, her voice steady, almost matter-of-fact. You're in a safe house. Rebels found us. Jace blinks, his mind sluggish as the memories of their last moments together, the battle with the bone dogs, their escape flood his senses. He remembers the pain, the blood, the fight for survival. But now, here, in this quiet room, the immediacy of their struggle feels distant, almost unreal. Jace, his brow furrowing, his voice barely a whisper, you save me. Carell doesn't answer right away, her eyes briefly dropping to her hands, which are still stained with blood from their escape. She takes a deep breath, as though preparing herself to say something that she's kept hidden for far too long. Finally, she speaks, her voice low but steady. Carell, her gaze softening, her words almost reluctant. I haven't told you everything about me? Jace's head tilts slightly, his eyes searching her face for any hint of what she means. He knows she's been through much, her quiet strength, the way she moves, the tension that lingers around her, but he hasn't pushed her for answers. They've both been survivors, not willing to open up to each other, afraid of the truth they might find. But now, in this moment of quiet, something shifts. Carell, her voice barely audible, like she's speaking more to herself than to him. I wasn't just a soldier, Jace. I was a member of the Verani Royal Guard. The words hang in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Carell looks down at the floor, her fingers tracing the edge of her cloak absently. Jace says nothing at first. He knows she's not saying this lightly. Jace, his voice low, his tone gentle. The Verani Royal Guard, that's high rank. How did you end up here, with us? Carell takes a deep breath, her eyes closing briefly as she remembers the past, the decisions, the moments that led her here. When she speaks again, her voice trembles, but she doesn't falter. Carell, her eyes reopening, locking with his eye, was ordered to burn a human village. To kill everyone. Women. Children. Innocents. I refused. And for that, I was branded a traitor. Cast out. Jace's eyes narrow, the weight of her words sinking in. He doesn't interrupt, doesn't ask more questions. He simply listens, letting her continue at her own pace. Carell, her voice now firmer, tinged with regret and anger. They said I was weak. That I didn't understand the necessity of war. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't slaughter the helpless. There's a long, tense pause. Carell's hands tremble slightly as she shifts in her seat, the weight of her confession hanging in the air. She doesn't know why she's telling him this. It's not something she's ever shared with anyone, not even the other rebels. But there's something about Jace, something about the way he's always been there when it mattered, that makes her feel like maybe, just maybe, this is a moment she can allow herself to be vulnerable. Jace, his voice low but steady, filled with understanding. I know what that feels like. Carell's eyes snap up to meet his. There's a moment of surprise. She hadn't expected him to respond like that. His words aren't filled with judgment or pity. They are quiet, understanding, the same way someone who's been through the same hell speaks. Carell, her voice soft, almost hesitant. What do you mean? Jace, his gaze far off, his voice tinged with a quiet bitterness. I was in Black Ops. They gave me orders to eliminate civilians. Refugees. They said it was for the good of the war. I was supposed to destroy a town, women, children, families, just to make an example. I refused. Carell's eyes widen slightly, and she leans forward, listening intently. This is the first time Jace has opened up to her, truly opened up. His words are raw, revealing the scarred places he's hidden away for so long. Jace, his voice quieter now, filled with a deep sorrow. They called me a coward. A traitor. Just like they did with you. But I couldn't. I couldn't do it. So I walked away. Carell watches him for a long moment, trying to understand the depth of his pain. He's always been so guarded, so distant. But now, in this quiet room, with a fire flickering between them, she sees the man behind the soldier. She sees the cost of his choices, the same cost she's paid. Carell, softly, almost as if speaking to herself, we both chose to walk away. Jace, his eyes meeting hers, his voice filled with quiet resolve. Yet, we're not so different, you and I. They sit in a silence for a while, the weight of their shared confessions hanging between them. There's no immediate relief, no sudden understanding. But in this moment, something shifts. They are no longer enemies. They are survivors, two people who have made choices that cost them everything, and yet, they are still here. The quiet of the canyon night is broken by the distant hum of a drone. The narrow passage where Carell and Jace take refuge is surrounded by jagged rocks and crumbling structures. A faint wind sweeps through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of burning debris and the heavy weight of impending danger. The air feels dense, as if something is watching, waiting for them to slip up. A single, dimly flickering light from a broken lantern casts sharp shadows against the walls of their hiding place. Carell and Jace huddle near the wall of the canyon, hidden by the ruins. The quiet hum of a drone above them grows louder, a faint mechanical whir that sends a ripple of unease through Carell's chest. Jace, his face still pale from his injuries, is scanning the area, his eyes narrowed as he listens intently for any sign of movement. Carell, they found us. Jace, no surprise there. The drones are already on us. He reaches into his bag, pulling out a small, battered piece of tech, an EMP device, barely functional but their only chance at survival. The device crackles faintly, emitting a low, unstable hum. Jace glances at it for a moment, then looks back at Carell, his expression grim. Jace, I'm going to trigger the EMP. It'll shut down the drones. But it'll fry everything, including us. Carell, we can't risk it. If we take them all out, what's left for us? Jace, we don't have much choice. They are already coming for us. We either take a shot at this or get torn apart out there. Carell hesitates. Her mind races through their options, but she knows the truth. The drones will find them, and they won't have the luxury of another escape. She looks at Jace. He's injured, barely standing, but still willing to fight. Carell, do it. But you make sure we both get out of this. Jace gives her a brief nod before turning to the device in his hands. He sets it down carefully, placing it near a cluster of old tech cables in the ruins. The buzzing sound of the EMP intensifies as he activates it, and his eyes dart around, watching the shadows. Jace, it'll take a few seconds to charge. Stay low. The silence is shattered by a sudden, deafening burst of sound, the harsh roar of flashbangs lighting up the dark, blinding them for a moment. The world is a blur of light and motion as plasma fire rips through the night, landing dangerously close. The sound of their plasma weapons charging fills the air, and the faint whine of hunter drones grows louder. Carell, they are on us. The drones have arrived, elite hunter drones, sleek and deadly, their eyes glowing red in the dark as they search for their targets. The sound of their mechanical growls fills the night air as they begin to swarm, their movements fast, calculated. Jace, get ready. They are coming. The bone dogs advance quickly, their movements precise and coordinated, like hunters tracking their prey. Carell and Jace barely have time to react before the first one lunges toward them, its metal jaws snapping shut with a sickening screech. Without hesitation, Jace raises his weapon, firing a shot that hits the bone dog square in the chest. Sparks fly, but the creature doesn't falter. It growls again, its glowing red eyes narrowing, and it comes at him with a speed that's almost impossible to track. Carell, move. She charges forward, meeting the bone dog head-on. Her weapon strikes with precision, slicing into the creature's leg, causing it to stumble. But it's not enough. The bone dog recovers quickly, lunging at her with terrifying speed. She rolls to the side just in time, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. Jace, watch out. A second bone dog emerges from the shadows, its claws slashing through the air, aiming for Carell's throat. Jace leaps forward, knocking her out of the way just as the creature's claw swipes past them. He takes the brunt of the attack, the metal claws scraping across his side, drawing blood. He grits his teeth but doesn't falter. Carell, Jace. But he's already moving, his instincts kicking in. He thrusts his weapon forward, narrowly missing the bone dog's throat. The creature snarls, its metal jaws snapping at him, but Jace pulls back just in time. Jace, keep moving. We need to get to the high ground. The bone dogs close in from all sides. Sparks fly as weapons collide with their armored bodies, the air thick with the scent of burning metal and the sharp tang of plasma fire. Carell moves with deadly efficiency, her blade flashing as she cuts through the bone dogs one by one, but there are too many of them. Their movements are too fast, too precise. They are engineered to kill. Carell and Jace fight back to back, their weapons flashing in the night as they hold their ground. Every strike is a desperate plea for survival. The bone dogs attack with precision, each one faster and more dangerous than the last. They are relentless, circling, adapting to every move the two warriors make. Jace, Carell. We can't keep this up. Carell watches as one of the bone dogs charges directly at them, its jaws open wide, ready to strike. In one fluid motion, she slashes at its throat, sending it crashing to the ground in a spray of sparks. But as the creature falls, another emerges, faster and more aggressive than before. Carell, we have to get to that pass. We're almost there. With a final surge of energy, they break through the remaining bone dogs, barely escaping the deadly circle they've been trapped in. Their breath comes in ragged bursts as they sprint toward the high ground, the canyon walls looming above them like silent giants. The ruins of an old relay tower stand like a broken sentinel against the dark, twisted landscape. The structure is battered, its metal supports bent and cracked, and the once proud tower now appears like a skeletal figure, silhouetted against the dimming sky. The air is thick with the smell of smoke and decay, the remnants of past battles lingering in the dust. The soft hum of the EMP device still echoes faintly in the background, the silence afterward unsettling. The world feels on the edge, fragile, as if one wrong move will set everything into chaos again. Carell and Jace stand beneath the looming remains of the relay tower, their breaths heavy, their bodies battered from the previous battles. The air is thick with tension. The quiet feels dangerous, too quiet. They are no longer on the run, but they are not yet safe. The hunter drones could be closing in at any moment. Carell, glancing over her shoulder, scanning the horizon. This is it. No turning back. Jace, his voice low, almost cold as he surveys the area. We either make it count here, or we don't make it out at all. He's holding the EMP device loosely in his hand, but there's no hesitation in his eyes. They both know what this will mean, one final gamble. He could trigger the EMP and disable everything, but they might not survive the blast. The decision hangs heavy between them. Carell, her gaze unwavering, though her voice betrays a flicker of doubt. It's too risky. Jace, his eyes locking with hers, his voice steady, as though the weight of the decision is already made. It's the only shot we've got. He steps toward the base of the relay tower, his movements purposeful. Carell follows him, her hand instinctively resting on her weapon, her mind running through every possible outcome. She's seen Jace take risks before, but this is different. If the EMP doesn't work, if the blast doesn't go off in time. Carell, almost to herself, her voice low, filled with a quiet urgency. How long do we have? Jace, glancing over his shoulder, a grim smile crossing his face. Not long. The sky above them darkens, the last remnants of sunlight slipping away. The first sign of the drone's return comes in the form of a low, vibrating hum. It's almost imperceptible at first, but it grows louder, more insistent, as though the ground itself is warning them of the coming storm. Carell's grip tightens on her weapon as she takes a few steps forward, her senses sharpening. Jace, muttering as he works quickly to stabilize the EMP device. Get ready. And then there it is. The unmistakable whine of hunter drones in the distance. Their sharp, mechanical growls pierce the silence, and Carell's stomach tightens. They are coming. Not just one, but a whole swarm, their sleek bodies cutting through the air like predators in search of prey. They move in perfect synchrony, their red eyes glowing brighter as they close in on the tower. Carell, turning to Jace, her voice urgent. We need to move. But Jace is already focused, his fingers flying over the EMP device. The countdown has begun, but so has the hunt. The first drone breaks through the ruins, its engines roaring, its plasma weapon charging. The others follow, more machines emerging from the shadows. Carell, her breath coming in sharp bursts, adrenaline kicking in Jace. Without a word, Jace hits the button. There's a sharp, electrical pulse, and for a moment, everything goes still. The drones freeze midair, their glowing red eyes flickering for a heartbeat before they collapse in mid-flight. Sparks fly as their systems short-circuit, their metal bodies crumpling like lifeless shells. For a brief moment, silence reigns. But it doesn't last. The rebel camp is nestled in a valley, hidden beneath the shattered remnants of a mountain range. The small, underground shelter is filled with makeshift equipment and flickering lights, its walls lined with salvaged technology. Outside, The dark sky stretches endlessly above, a canvas of stars barely visible through the smoke that still rises from the battlefield. Inside, the air smells faintly of damp earth and burnt wood. The tension is palpable as the rebels prepare for something monumental. Carell sits in front of a damaged console, her hands trembling slightly as she connects wires and types commands into a series of encrypted systems. Her face is pale, and exhaustion lingers in her eyes, but there's a sharpness there too, a fire that's been lit by everything they've been through. The flickering screen before her comes to life as she feeds the footage into the transmission system. It's the footage of the hunter drones, the chaos, the battle, and most importantly, the damning evidence that Commander Voss ordered the execution of innocent civilians. Jace stands nearby, watching her work with a quiet intensity. His body is still healing from the wounds he suffered during the fight, but he doesn't seem to care. His focus is on her, on this final act. This is the moment they've both been working toward, the moment that could change everything. Jace, are you sure about this? Carell, we don't have a choice. The truth needs to be out there. If we don't do this, then it was all for nothing. Jace nods, stepping back slightly, his hand subconsciously reaching for the hilt of his weapon as if expecting another attack, but nothing happens. The room is filled with the hum of equipment, the only sound in the space as Carell connects the last cables, her eyes fixed on the screen. The broadcast begins. The screen flickers, and Carell's face appears, bruised but determined. Her voice is clear, but it carries a weight that only someone who's seen the horrors of war could convey. Carell, this is Carell, formerly of the Verani Royal Guard. I am submitting this footage to the galaxy, proof that Commander Voss and his forces have committed illegal executions of innocent civilians. These aren't soldiers. These are murderers. And we will not stand by in silence anymore. The footage she submitted plays across the screen gruesome scenes of the hunter drones carrying out Voss's orders, killing innocent men, women, and children. The camera shakes at times, the images distorted by the chaos, but it's undeniable. The world is about to see the truth. Carell, we didn't ask for war. We refused to be puppets. And we will rise. The transmission cuts off, but it's too late. The damage has been done. The message is out there. The footage will spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The seconds that follow feel like hours, the weight of what they've just done settling in. Carell steps back from the console, her eyes tired but fierce. Carell, it's done. Across the galaxy, the broadcast is received. Rebel outposts, hidden resistance groups, even citizens in the farthest corners of the war-torn worlds catch sight of Carell's message. The footage, the truth, floods into homes, command centers, and hidden safe houses. The world begins to see the atrocities committed under Voss's command. The flames of rebellion begin to spark. Voice on a rebel ship. Did you see that? She did it. She exposed them. Another rebel voice. The whole galaxy knows. They can't hide this. The message goes viral. The footage of their final stand in the canyon, the moment of desperation and defiance, spreads across every screen, every communication channel. It's a symbol of rebellion, of defiance against tyranny. Jace, it's happening. The galaxy's waking up. Carell, we've started something, Jace. But this isn't over. The small recovery room within the rebel camp is bathed in the soft glow of a single lantern. The walls are rough, made from salvaged materials, and the air smells faintly of herbs and antiseptic. The faint sounds of murmuring voices and soft footfalls can be heard outside, a distant reminder that the world continues to move even as they rest. Jace lies in a simple cot, his body battered but slowly healing. His side is bandaged, and the ragged marks of their journey are clear on his face. Carell sits nearby, her posture tense but focused, keeping watch over him. Jace slowly stirs, his eyelids fluttering as consciousness begins to take hold. His vision is blurry at first, and he blinks several times to adjust. The room is dim, the light from the lantern casting gentle shadows against the walls. As his senses sharpen, he takes in his surroundings, a place of temporary safety, but not peace. His gaze moves to the figure seated beside him. Carell is watching him with quiet vigilance, her eyes tired but unwavering. A soft breath escapes him as he realizes where he is, alive, but still not out of danger. Still unsure of what comes next. Jace, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper, "You came back." Carell doesn't immediately respond. She simply watches him with an intensity that speaks volumes, her face unreadable for a moment. There's a flicker of something, compassion, perhaps, but she hides it quickly. Instead, she leans forward slightly, her hands gently adjusting his bandages as she checks on his wounds. Carell, her voice low, without hesitation, "I never left." Jace studies her for a long moment. He can see the weight in her eyes, the same weight that he carries in his own chest. The weight of survival, of decisions made, of battles fought. But for now, there is a quiet understanding between them. They are both still here, against all odds. Jace, his eyes searching hers, his voice soft, "I thought you were gone. That I was alone." Carell, her voice steady, but with a subtle undercurrent of emotion, "You weren't alone. You never were." There's a long pause between them, one filled with the unspoken words and emotions that have been building up over the course of their journey. They've fought side by side, but now they are just two people, standing in the aftermath of everything they've been through. Carell leans back in her seat, her eyes now focused on the small fire in the corner of the room. The stillness of the moment is interrupted by the soft sound of children's laughter from outside the camp. The noise is distant, yet it stands in stark contrast to the violence and chaos they've faced. The sound is a reminder that there is still hope, still something worth fighting for. Jace, his voice a little stronger now, filled with quiet realization, "I'm not used to this, to people staying." Carell, her tone slightly softer as she glances back at him, her eyes reflecting a deep understanding, "You don't have to get used to it. Not anymore. Jace sits up slightly, his body protesting the movement, but he forces himself to rise just enough to look at her. He's not just looking at the soldier who fought by his side, he's looking at the person who has stayed with him, despite everything, despite the odds, despite their pasts. Jace, why did you stay? After everything. Carell looks at him for a moment, her eyes searching, as if weighing how much of herself she's willing to reveal. She exhales slowly, her expression softening as she speaks, the hard edges of her past momentarily slipping away. Carell, her voice quieter now, a mix of vulnerability and truth. Because you stayed too. I didn't ask you to. You didn't have to. But you did. And that means something. A quiet moment passes, and for the first time, Jace allows himself to feel the weight of her words. The battle has always been their focus, their survival, their goal, but in this moment, it's something else that stands out, a bond forged not through conflict, but through mutual choice. Through the decision to not walk away. Jace, finally speaking, his voice steady but filled with quiet emotion. I didn't save you. I just didn't walk away. Carell looks at him, her heart still guarded but her words sincere. She leans slightly toward him, offering a brief, but meaningful, connection, a silent acknowledgement of everything they've been through. Carell, softly, her voice almost a whisper, that's enough. They share a look, the tension of their pasts and the weight of their future resting between them. In this small moment, there's no need for grand speeches, no need for declarations. They understand each other in ways words can't fully capture. The quiet of the room stretches on, the faint sounds of the camp filtering in from outside. Jace and Carell, two soldiers, two survivors, have found a small fragment of peace. A peace not born from the absence of danger, but from the choice to remain, to stand together even when the world around them is crumbling. The night continues outside, but inside this small room, there's a flicker of something that feels like hope. And for the first time in a long while, that hope doesn't feel impossible. What started as an act of mercy between sworn enemies soon becomes a catalyst for change. Carell, the Verani warrior, and Jace, the human soldier, find themselves bound by more than just survival. They uncover a shared humanity that no war can erase. Through betrayal, sacrifice, and unexpected compassion, their journey challenges everything they've known and opens the door to a future where the lines between right and wrong are no longer so clear. But their story is far from over. The galaxy has only just begun to listen, and with a spark of rebellion ignited, the fight for freedom has entered a new phase. Carell and Jace are no longer just survivors, they are symbols of hope in a broken world. Their actions have set the stage for something larger, something that can change the course of the war forever. This is only the beginning. If you're captivated by their journey and want to see how the story unfolds, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Alien Chronicles will continue to bring you deeper into this world of rebellion, survival, and unexpected alliances. Don't miss the next chapter, because in this galaxy, Nothing is ever as it seems.